Hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar of the Ohio Fish and Wildlife Presentation Series, brought to you by the Ohio Fish and Wildlife Management Association, the Ohio Bird Conservation Initiative, and the Ohio chapter of the Wildlife Society. My name is Ken Duren, and I'll be your presenter today. Also online with us is Amanda. She will be taking care of all the technical side of the webinar, so if you're experiencing difficulties or have any questions, feel free to type those questions in the chat bar on the bottom right side of your screen, and she'll be able to answer any that you have. Before I get into the main presentation today, I want to remind you that if you want to see upcoming webinars like our next one on the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact, Dirk Cochran with the Ohio Division of Wildlife will be talking about the history of that compact and how it benefits Ohio. That will be August 21st at 10 a.m. You can go to the link on your screen right now and learn more about that, and then also see recordings of the past webinars that we have had. Let's go ahead and move on to what you guys came here for today, which is the presentation, Saving Ohio's Barn Owls. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the natural history of barn owls. This includes what they look like, what they eat, where they nest, what kind of habitat they live in. Then I'll be go into Ohio's histories, barn owls, populations, when they arrived in Ohio and how the populations are doing right now. And then lastly, I'll be talking about the future direction that the Ohio Division of Wildlife wants to take to make sure that barn owls are doing well in Ohio into the future. Let's start with ID, though. You guys can see this picture now. This is an adult barn owl. Their distinguishing characteristics are their face. It's got a white heart-shaped face, and then their back is a light golden brown and gray coloring. They also have some specks of white on their back and some black barring. These are the easiest way to tell the identification of a barn owl and distinguish it from other owls that you may see. Another key characteristic of barn owls are their chest. Usually it's very light colored, but that can actually vary among individuals. And an interesting thing about that is you can tell the sex of the barn owls by looking at the color of their chest. So barn owls' chest will be almost as dark as their back, all the way to almost being completely white. And across that range, you can use this to sex the individual barn owl. So the owls that you see on the bottom of your screen, which are lighter in color, those will be the males, and then females will have a darker chest. So if you're seeing an individual barn owl with a very, very dark chest, you can be almost certain that is a female. But if you see one with a chest that is almost white, you can be certain that that's a male. It gets a little more tricky when you're seeing owls that are kind of in the middle range of the spectrum. So sometimes you won't actually be able to determine the sex of a barn owl unless you actually see a pair of them together. And then when you see a pair together, the darker one is always going to be the female, and the lighter one will be the male. So I hope you guys are paying close attention to this. Take a look at this photo. I'll let you look at it for a little bit, and then we're going to have a quiz. All right, let's go ahead and start the quiz. Amanda, can you bring up that poll? I wanted to know which one of those owls that you just saw is the female. Go ahead and click left or right there, and I'll wait a little bit and see what you guys think. Amanda, when we get a decent number of votes, you can go ahead and close that and tell us what people thought.
All right, well, we're at 68% of people have answered, so I'll go ahead and close that poll. And you can see 100% of our respondents said the left was the female.
All right, great. I'm glad you guys are paying attention. Yeah, you can see that the left owl has a much darker chest compared to the one on the right. So it is pretty easy to see when you have a pair of them together. It's pretty easy to distinguish the sex. Now, another thing about ID is identifying them by the sound. And there's a common misconception that people have about owls is that all owls hoot, and that's the noise that they make. But that's not the case, and barn owls are an exception to that. And they make a quite a scary sound. Some people would describe it as pure evil. Let's go ahead and listen to what that sounds like. All right, thank you. Some of you listening to that from the comfort of your office may not think that that's too bad or too scary of a sound. So I want you to stop right now, close your eyes, and picture yourself in the middle of the night walking down a lonely street, and you're passing this old creaky barn, and the wind is blowing, and the barn is creaking under the stress of the wind. And now let's listen to that sound again. All right, now if you guys aren't going to have nightmares from that, then you're very tough. Because that is quite a scary sound in the middle of the night, especially if you don't know what it is. And you just wouldn't expect that to come from a creature as beautiful as an owl. The other thing you wouldn't expect from a creature this beautiful is how ugly their chicks are. Let's go ahead and show you a picture of those chicks. So some of you are, again, thinking that those aren't too bad. They're actually kind of cute in their fuzziness. Hold that thought. These are not so cute. These are a little bit older than the pictures you just saw, and you can see that they're fairly ugly. Some people may think they're cute in an ugly sort of way, but they tend to get ugly, and it's surprising when you see how beautiful the adults actually are. An interesting thing about the chicks is most birds, when their eggs hatch, they all hatch at once. But barn owls aren't that way. In fact, they'll hatch in the order that that the eggs were laid. So this would be a typical barn owl nest where you have on the far right, you have a chick that's only about a week and a half old, and then on the far left you have the oldest chick, and it's about 4.5 weeks old. So when a female lays an egg, she'll start incubating it immediately, and about a month later, the egg will hatch. And she'll lay an egg every probably 3 days. And so that you see this succession of different ages as the chicks were hatching in relation to when they were born. That's an interesting thing that most birds don't actually have. So many people wonder when exactly barn owls would begin nesting. Well, they start that usually here in Ohio. They'll start incubating or laying the eggs at the beginning of May. And as I said, it takes about a month for the eggs to hatch. And then you'll start having chicks. Right about now, a lot of the nests will start having chicks. And they'll stay in that nest box, eventually growing in their adult feathers. So they'll move from this downy color and start filling in and start looking like an adult. And at about 8.5 weeks, you'll have a nest full of owls that you can barely tell the difference between the chicks and the adults. And at 8.5 weeks, with fully feathered, they'll probably start trying to leave the nest and flying around. And they'll stick around, and the parents will continue to feed them until they are about 12 to 13 weeks old. And then they'll be on their own for the most part. But if you have a barn owl living near you, right between 8 to 10 weeks, you'll see them out and about at night, maybe in a tree nearby, making a lot of noise. Their sound is a little bit different from the adults. Let's go ahead and listen to what the chicks will sound like. So you see that sounds a little bit different than the adults. That's a begging call that they do to let their parents know that they're hungry and that they should be fed. And that's something that you'll hear a lot as the chicks, after they start hatching and before they start fledging, and as they're fledging. Okay, so that's the identification for barn owls. Let's now talk about how to get barn owls to your house. And really, there's two things that you should try to get for barn owls. Is they need a place to nest, a nice, safe place to nest, and they need a place for food. We're going to start with food, start talking about what they need food-wise. And you can see this picture here. It shows a grass field. And that's not because barn owls eat grass. They're not like cows. They eat all animals, mostly small mammals. And this picture shows their favorite food item, the meadow vole. So small mammals will make up 90 to, in some years, 100% of their diet. And meadow voles will probably be around 80%, depending on how strong a population they have. They really spend a lot of time and really concentrate on meadow voles, and that's their primary food item. And meadow voles live in grassy fields. So that's why, that's the foraging habitat that barn owls need. They need grassy fields. Some people ask, well, what type of grassy fields, what should my field look like for barn owls? Some areas, if they have really tall, dense grass, that's not ideal for barn owls because they need to be able to get down to the ground where the meadow voles and the small mammals are running around. So tall, dense grass can be difficult for them to actually forage in. Medium to short grass fields are perfect for barn owls because they can easily access the ground where the meadow voles are running. So here in Ohio, where we find that short to medium height grass fields are pastures and hay fields. Those are some of the best habitat or some of the best foraging habitat for barn owls that is in Ohio. The other part of barn owl habitat that they need is a safe place to nest. And these should be close to where they can find food. When people ask where the nest site should be located, we generally recommended that they be within a mile of 40 acres, of at least 40 acres of grass fields, of pastures or hay fields. More grass is always better. More habitat, more places for them to find food is always better, but you need at least 40 acres of places where they can forage within a mile of their nest sites. So what does make up a nest site? As their name implies, barn owls will nest in barns. They also frequently nest in silos here in Ohio, but they can also nest in some really strange places. Here's a nest from 2000 that was in Adams County, right just directly above the Ohio River. And if you see this catwalk on the upper left photo, this is a catwalk that a coal barge would tie into. And then the upper right photo shows where the actual nest was. It was under these wooden boards here in the catwalk, and then the bottom right photo shows the actual chicks there in the catwalk. So they really just need a dark, safe place, and then they will lay their eggs as long as it's close to food. And that's what we had here is this in Adams County was they found a dark spot that had good foraging habitat nearby, and they put up a nest. It's not usual, but they will make use of anything that they can. Here's another weird one. I forget where this one was at, but this was in a factory. You can see that the pipes are coming out of the factory, and that's where the nest was for this barn owl pair. So again, they can make use of a lot of different dark places as long as they have the food nearby. But you don't have to have weird places if you want to have your own barn. You don't have to put up a factory just to have a barn owl nesting there. The easiest thing for you to do if you have foraging habitat nearby is to put up a nest box. Nest boxes, the design that the Division of Wildlife recommends, go on the inside wall of the barn, and you can see that on the photo on the right. It's sitting up on a rafter high up in the barn, and then the photo on the left shows what it looks like from the outside. You cut a small 6 by 6 inch hole into the wall of the barn, and then that's the only access that owls will have into the box. So these boxes should be located, installed at least 15 feet above the ground, but you can always go a little higher if you need to. And again, these will work and attract barn owls if you have the right foraging habitat nearby. What's great about these is that the only access into the box is through that hole, so things like raccoons or other mammalian predators aren't going to be able to get access to that nest. And then having a 6 by 6 inch hole is small enough that it's going to exclude some of the bigger owls like the great horned owl or barred owls from getting in and also getting to that nest and killing the young barn owls. If you guys are interested in building a box to put up in your own barn, my email is on the screen. Send me an email and I will send you the plans that we use for the Division of Wildlife. It's really simple to make, it's really cheap, and you can do that with very little tools. So a lot of people have made these and they're really, really easy to make. Before I go on, I just want to see if there's any questions with what I've covered so far on just identification or attracting barn owls to your area. Amanda, do we have any questions?
There's no questions right now, but we can take a minute here and see if anybody submits any. Nope, doesn't look like we have any right now.
Okay, well, I'll move on. If you guys think of any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box. Let's move on now to the history of barn owls in Ohio. So barn owls haven't always lived in Ohio. Their first record of barn owls was actually in 1861. For history buffs, that was the year that Abraham Lincoln became president. And barn owls continued to expand after they were first recorded here into the 1900s. They were considered common throughout the state, and they really reached their peak in population in the 1930s when we could find them in 84 of Ohio's 88 counties. So they were really, really widespread and common. And the question that a lot of people ask is, well, what brought them here? And the answer is farming. People moving into Ohio were clearing forests, and they were setting up small farms. And these small farms were perfect barn owl habitat. They often had a lot of those hay fields and had pastures to raise their livestock and keep their horses. They also had a lot of barns and silos, so there's plenty of places for them to nest. That combination of those small farms with a lot of pastures and livestock was great for barn owls. They really thrived under those conditions. But after World War II, moving into the 1940s, we started seeing a move away from that sort of agriculture. Now it would be considered messy and outdated or old farming. What we see now in farming practices are more like this, where you have huge, large expanses of fields that are planted in corn or soybeans. And these places, while they produce a lot more food for people, they provide no habitat whatsoever for barn owls. We've also seen a reduction in barns, and the barns that are put up tend to be sealed off better so that owls can't get into them. So this combination of cleaner farming practices, you're losing foraging habitat, you're also losing nesting habitat for barn owls, and started leading to a decline. And this decline, they really hit bottom in the 1980s when there was probably only 18, less than 20 nests in the entire state that we knew about. And that's quite a drastic drop, going from having them in 84 of the 88 counties to just only maybe 18 to 20 nests in the entire state. It was really quite alarming. So the Division of Wildlife decided they needed to do something. This was an emergency. We needed to do something if we wanted to continue having barn owls in the state. So what we did, Jack Henry and Kathy Shipley were the biologists that started this program, and they did a great job with it. They started installing nest boxes throughout the state. And since the 1980s, we've installed almost 400 barn owl nest boxes across Ohio. The way we first started putting up boxes were to find suitable foraging habitat and then locate a landowner nearby, the nearest landowner, who is willing to let us put up a nest box in their barn. And so we started putting these nest boxes out there, getting them out there, and we come back every summer, check to see if they were used, and then come back in the winter and clean them out so that we can maintain, so they'd be able to continue using those nest boxes. And as we were doing this, barn owls would move in and start using these nest boxes. And when we had a situation like that, we would put up more nest boxes around it. So if a box was used, we'd put up 3 nest boxes nearby. The hope was that you found where they were. Now if we create more places for them to nest, maybe their population will expand. And that's exactly what happened. And so when you're looking at this map and you see real tight clusters of dots, that's the reason for it. Here in Holmes in Wayne County in the northeast part of the state, you see where it's almost a black ink blob. That's because that's where we first started getting barn owls, and we put up nest boxes, and they moved in, and we put up more, and then they moved into those, and pretty soon we have a whole lot of nest boxes in Holmes and Wayne County, and we also have a lot of barn owls in those counties. So anytime you see some real tight clusters of boxes together, it was because we had a barn owl there, and we put up a lot more. It was a very, very good strategy at increasing the population. As I said, we were checking every year to see if barn owls were actually using those boxes. And here's what it looks like. So back in the 80s into the early 90s, we were just kind of stable at around 18 to sometimes less nests that were in the state. But then in the late 90s, barn owls really started taking off, and they really started using those boxes, and we saw a really good population increase. So much so that in 2002, we were able to take barn owls from a state endangered species and upgrade them to a state threatened species. In 2002, we had 46 nests, and they've continued to expand into a peak in 2012 when we had over 100 known nests in the state. That's a great success story so far, and shows you how well that box program has worked. Now, in addition to just monitoring and seeing if the boxes were being used, we were also banding the barn owls that were using those boxes. So from 1988 to 2006, we banded at 619 active nest sites, including over 1,800 chicks were banded and over 300 adults were banded. And of all of those barn owls that were banded, we recaptured 150 of those. What we learned from the banding was that barn owls that started a nest, a vast majority of them successfully raised at least one young out of that nest. So if they started at least one young, fledged, and flew out and left the nest, that's very, very good success. It was some years above 90%. That's excellent. We also saw that the adults who were nesting had great survival. They were surviving very well throughout the years. So overall, it showed that these barn owl nest boxes were a great way to increase the population, and they provided very safe places for the barn owls to nest. So all of those have shown that, all this information has shown that the nest box program that we started was doing great things. So let's go for a recap here on barn owls. One, they were in serious trouble. I mean, very serious trouble. We were on the verge of losing barn owls in this state. So we took drastic steps. We installed a whole lot of boxes across the state. We would go and spend a lot of time checking those boxes and maintaining them. It takes a lot of work, and it's a lot of effort to go to these boxes every year and clean them out and check them and put them up and replace them if they need to be. That was a lot of work. but it worked. It was successful, and barn owl populations were starting to recover. So the question, though, comes down to persistence versus thriving. So with this nest box program, barn owls were persisting again in the state. They were hanging on. The box program showed that, and they were starting to increase. But it's still not huge numbers. 100 is great, but that's not huge. It's great because of what they were. I wouldn't say that 100 is great for the future. So the question becomes: is do we want persistence, which we were getting, or do we want barn owls to thrive? And I think everybody would agree that we would want barn owls to be thriving in the future, so that we can completely take them off the endangered species list and move them from threatened to not having any status. So what does thriving look like? And to me, thriving looks like a continued expansion. We still need more barn owls living in the state. Again, like I said, 100 is good, but we want more. We want a lot more. And part of that thriving is public support. So it's not just the Division of Wildlife maintaining and doing everything for these barn owls. It's the public doing this, and then that's a lot more sustainable into the future, is having the public caring and providing support to barn owls. So let's talk about what that looks like. First, we'll go with continued expansion. How do we expand barn owl populations? Well, from what we know and what we've seen, we know that if we put up more barn owl boxes, we can get further expansion. So that's the first step of what we're going to be doing into the future, is putting up more barn owl boxes. The question, though, is where do we put them? So let's look at a barn owl. This map shows the percentage of grass habitat for each township in Ohio. And then the gray dots are the locations of where we have our nest boxes in the state. And you can see that some of our nest boxes are in some of those areas with a lot of grass habitat, which is good because that's what they need foraging-wise. But a lot of our nest boxes are in places where there's very little grass habitat. And then there's also some townships that have a whole lot of grass habitat but don't have any nest boxes. So when we're talking about putting up more barn owl boxes, this kind of gives you an idea of where we need to go. So we identified some townships where we think we need to have barn owl boxes because it's the best foraging habitat out there. In all these townships, the criteria for selecting them was they had at least 25% of the township was grass cover, pastures and hay fields, and they were adjacent or right next to another township with that same amount of habitat. And you can see where those townships are right here in the state. Most of them are in the eastern part of the state, or even down into the south. This big block of blank stuff in the west and the northwest, that's where we have a lot of row crop agriculture and not very much pasture or hay fields. So it's probably not going to support that many barn owls. So that's not where you really want to target putting up more boxes. So our goal is to have one barn owl box, and at least one barn owl box in each one of these townships. And we're planning on doing that within the next two to 3 years, just getting at least one box up in every single one of these townships. Hopefully that will expand the population and get more barn owls nesting out there. The other thing is the public support. So the first thing that we're doing for public support is every single one of these new boxes we're putting out there, we're trying to put it up in a location where the landowner is going to maintain that box. We want the landowner to go up there. It's pretty simple. Every year you have to go up there and scrape out anything in that box, and that's it, just once a year. And some people may say that that's probably asking a lot, but we see this with a lot of other species: bluebirds, wood ducks, martins, purple martins. People like to maintain these nest boxes. They do this as a hobby, and some people spend tremendous amounts of time, money, and effort into maintaining these boxes because they get enjoyment out of having those birds live there or live nearby. And just look at the picture on the bottom with all those purple martin houses up. One person maintains all of these. I forget the exact number, but I believe it was around 700 nests there that this person takes down, cleans out every year, and puts back up. That's a lot of effort, that's a lot of time, and that's a lot of money. But people are willing to do this because they enjoy doing it. So I think we can get that, and that's where we want to get with barn houses, getting it to the point where people really enjoy going out and maintaining nests for barn owls. The other part of public support is just hearing about where barn owls are living. We know that there are a few barn owls not living in the boxes that we put up, but we don't get in the past we haven't heard much about those. So one way to increase the number of reports that we're getting is that we're making a concerted effort to let people know that we want to hear where barn owls are living. So we started this last summer. We put up posters across the state. We put out news releases. We used our social media to let people know that we want you to report barn owls that are living near you. The link at the bottom of the page is a video, an excellent video that Tim Daniel put together, asking people to report barn owls. I suggest going to that website and watching the video. Please wait till after the presentation, though. But it's an excellent, excellent video. This year, we're trying this again. We're putting out posters, and new this year, which is on the right side of the screen in the middle, we put together business cards that we're going to be handing out at events that division personnel go to, so county fairs, state fairs, things like that. This is all to get people to know that we want to hear about barn owl reports. And one of the reasons we want to know about these reports is if we're seeing a lot of owls that are in the state not using our boxes, it's a good sign that barn owls are surviving and thriving on their own without the division's intervention by maintaining these boxes every year. So if we see a lot of nesting outside of the boxes that the division maintains, it's a very good sign that barn owls are doing better than we thought they were doing. So that's what the hope is for this, and please, if you have seen a barn owl, please report it. Call 1-800-WILDLIFE. The number's there on the screen. And let us know. We usually ask for pictures just to verify, and then if you're willing, we'll even put those pictures up on our social media to highlight what you have and share with everybody, because people enjoy seeing and hearing about these owls. As I mentioned, we started last year, and we had a great success for the first year trying this. We were able to confirm 22 barn owls across the state. This was great. This is the most number of barn owl observations that we've had reported ever. And those 22 confirmations occurred in 15 counties, which are highlighted in gray there on the screen. So if you know of a county that's not listed and you know of a barn owl in there, you got to let us know, and we can add your county on there. So far this year, we have 7 observations, but it's still early in the season, so we're hoping that we'll increase that by the end of the summer, especially as the chicks are going to start to be more active. They're start to be more noisy. People will start realizing that they have those owls living in their barns now. So the point of all of this, the public support, why we want it, we want to do what's in this quote. This great quote by Baba Diome. He was a conservationist from Senegal, and I love this quote, and it gets to the point of what we want with the public support, is we want to teach people about barn owls so that they understand them, and they come to love them, and then once they love them, they want to conserve them. That's the point of getting public support. Is the Division of Wildlife can do a lot, but there's a lot more people in the state, and if we get all of those people, or even a small fraction of those people, that's a lot more people trying and to conserve barn owls, and we're going to be a lot more successful with the more people we get trying to conserve barn owls in the state. So that is all I have. Again, please report any barn owls that you have, and I can take questions.
Okay, so we have some questions coming in. The first one is, did barn owls have a different name before they were barn owls? And do we know where they made their nest before farming and barns came into being?
Yeah, great question. Barn owls actually have multiple names. A common one is monkey-faced owl, ghost owl. There's numerous names that barn owls have. And the second part of that was, where did they nest before people came?
Yes.
Well, they came into Ohio using the barns and things that people put up on the farms. So they were probably always using those types of structures in Ohio. Where they were originally from, which is out in the prairies and in the plain states, they would nest in old hollow trees. They would also nest on the side of cliffs in caves in the cliffs. Those are common areas to nest.
Okay, our next question is, can you have more than one nest box in a single barn?
Yeah, we do that. We have put up more than one box in a single barn. What's important is to have enough foraging habitat for them. So if one pair needed 40 acres, you're going to at least need 80 for two. Again, you're probably going to want a lot more than that, but they're not extremely territorial, so they should be able to have more than one nest in a single barn.
Can you give us an idea of how much personnel time the Division of Wildlife devotes to barn owls, specifically like number of staff that work with them or the percentage of your job duty?
I don't know the exact numbers, but we have a lot of work units working on it every year. Before, we would do summer checks and then winter checks. And each one of those, we would visit every single one of those boxes we have up, which right now is about 200. So people will go out to those and check them every year. And so we had a large number of people going and checking these boxes and putting a lot of effort into it.
What are the major competitors of the barn owl in Ohio? So other owls, hawks, any other bird species?
Good question. Great horned owls are a predator for barn owls. So if that's why you want to keep that hole small going into the nest box, because you want to keep the great horns out. Otherwise, I don't think there's not a whole lot of competition for the meadow voles. There's usually a lot out there for them, but things like other mammals like foxes or bobcats even will also eat meadow voles. But I don't know if there's a whole lot of competition between them.
Here's an interesting question. Do barn owls ever attack barn cats?
No, they don't. In fact, one of the things we have seen over time is that barns with animals in them, like cats or dogs, will tend to do better for barn owls nesting because, especially dogs, they tend to keep out the raccoons or the possums, the nest predators. A dog will chase those away, and so those tend to be not preferred, but barn owls will often use those types of barns when you have a dog or a cat in them.
How important is it to clean out the nest boxes every year?
That's very important. Barn owls will create a lot of pellets, which are the undigestible components of their food, so the bones and the fur, and they'll regurgitate them. And if you have 6 owlets eating there constantly, you can get a nice layer of pellets in that box. And over time, it can build up to where there's not enough space for the barn owls.
Here's a question from Kathy Shipley. Were the confirmed sightings nesting owls or just sightings at any time of the year, and who confirmed the sightings?
They were sightings that happened during the nesting season, so only in the summer. And I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was 12 to 15 of them were nest. Others were just sightings. And I would call up and confirm the sightings, talk with the people. One of the easiest ways to eliminate a lot of the sightings was I would ask them what it sounded like, and some people would say it hooted, and I knew I'd be able to check that one off pretty quickly.
You talked a lot about putting nest boxes in barns. Would you recommend putting them up on poles? And if so, how high of a pole, and should those poles be close to trees?
Yes, if you can figure out a way to put them up on a pole, they would probably work just fine. Again, they would need to be at least 15 feet up, which is what we recommend for nest boxes in barns. And I believe the Wilds, and Tom and Jack Henry are trying this out in the Wilds. They're trying to develop a pole that they can easily move the box up and down every year so they can access it and clean it out. So it would work, yes, and it doesn't necessarily need to be by trees.
So this question says, this might be premature, but any idea what kind of negative effects the harsh winter had on barn owls? She says some of her colleagues who work in the field mentioned finding several that apparently died of starvation or from the very cold temperatures.
Yeah, I think it was a rough winter on barn owls. I've had a few reports of dead barn owls being found. When I was talking about what they need foraging-wise, and tall grass can get in their way and prevent them from getting to the food, well, all the snow that we had this winter also prevents them from being able to capture their primary prey. So I think and they are also not very well insulated like a lot of other owls are. So I think this winter was rough on them, and we might see a decline in the population because of how bad the winter was.
This question is sort of related to a previous one, but she's asking how important it is to clean out the nest boxes every year. So could you do every other year, for instance?
You could probably get away with that. The main thing is to keep it so that you want to go back every year, because sometimes chicks will die in there. You want to clean those out too, and make sure that there's not too much in there. And then going back every year, also make sure that there's no damage to the box or anything like that.
What's the ideal time of year or time of season to put a box up? When do the owls start looking for a nest box?
So the ideal time is, I would say, any time that you can put the box up. That's when you should do it. If you put it up in the summer, like May, even all the way into winter and December, it's probably not going to be used till the spring. So put it up whenever you have time, whenever you're comfortable. That's when I would suggest putting it up. But if you do it during the nesting season, you'll probably have to wait a year before you actually see barn owls using it.
How much activity can an owl withstand near their nest? This person has a campground in Medina County, and there's a historical barn that could potentially house a nest, but there's a lot of human activity there on the summer weekends. Would that disrupt the owls?
No, probably not. Some of the barn owls, or the nests that we have, are in people's barns that they use frequently. They store their machinery in there. They're going in and out. As long as people aren't going up to the nest box and disturbing the nest, they should do fine.
Is there a concern about landowners disturbing the nest during the early part of the nesting cycle when the nest could be abandoned?
Yeah, you definitely want to stay away from that nest. And really, I would only go in up to the box. I would only suggest doing that in the winter months or in fall, because you don't want to chase them away.
I think her question was more of, are you doing anything to educate the landowners to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, we ask them when we tell them or ask them to maintain it. We give them a window of when we would like them to clean it out and check it, and we ask them to not do it, not disturb an actual nesting owl.
Do the very hot temperatures affect nesting success?
They can, if it gets too hot, it can. But these nest boxes are inside the barn, so they tend to be shaded. And that hole will provide some air circulation. So it can be a factor. I just don't know how much of a factor it is.
Okay, that's all the questions we have for now. Lots of really great questions. So I guess we'll give it a minute here to see if any others come in. But now might be a good time to remind everyone that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the YouTube page that you saw in the link on the beginning of this webinar that I can send out to all of you here in a minute so that you can view this one, share it with anyone that wasn't able to attend today, or view some of our past webinars as well. Here we have another question. Is there a north-south exposure that is best recommended?
We haven't noticed that in the boxes that we put up. These boxes are pretty big, and with just a small hole in it, they can get out behind, so they're not exposed to the weather. So, no, we haven't noticed a north-south exposure or exposure direction that's best for barn owls. It may be easiest to put them up facing foraging habitat. That's what I would recommend.
All right, I just sent the link out for everyone there of our YouTube site. Are there local soil and water conservation district offices located, included in helping identify the nesting areas?
Yep, we use a lot of our partners to help find places to put up nests, and soil and water conservation districts were one of those because they know the farmers and they know the landowners out there that probably would make good places to put up a nest box.
Are you providing the boxes, or do folks have to build their own?
We are providing boxes for people in those townships, yes.
And how would someone, would they contact you to learn more about that?
You can contact me, and I will probably refer you to whatever the wildlife management staff in the districts that you work in. So you could also contact the district offices.
Okay, looks like that might be all our questions.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, and enjoy your day.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.